moments of silence. Please remain seated while we sing our ingathering hymn, which can be found on your program or is number 1023 in the green hymnal. Good afternoon, and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. This is a community where curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nurturing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual, as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Pat Carlson, and on behalf of the congregation, I would like to extend a special welcome to visitors. We are a welcoming congregation. So, wherever you are, and whoever you are, or wherever you happen to be on your life journey, we celebrate your presence among us. Newcomers are encouraged to stay for our fellowship hour after the service in the Commons area in the Atrium Addition. Members of our staff and lay ministry will be on hand to welcome you. If you are accompanied by a young child, please remember that if they need to talk or move about, we have the loggia area to my right is a good place to retire with them. And at this time, we ask you to turn off all beepers, cell phones, and other electronic equipment that might cause a disturbance during the hour. I would like to acknowledge those individuals who help our service run smoothly. You were welcomed this morning by Stacy Gillum. Lay ministers is Shirley Chosey and Bob Radford. Usher is Paula Appelbach and Carol Rowan. Deb Lawrence will be at Hospitality Coffee as our hostess. And I believe you know that we have a special guitarist with us this morning with the special music. And we do appreciate that so much. Now please note the announcements that are in the red floors in your order of service, which describe upcoming events at the Society and provide more information about today's events. Here are another item that deserves real special attention, and I want to be sure that you remember to put the Winter Forum Parish meeting scheduled for 12:30 next Sunday on your calendar. Several important topics, including an update on our financial status, a report from our Growth Task Force, and the selection of a nominating committee members will be on the agenda. Child care will be available, but parents need to sign up in advance at the child care room in the Atrium Courtyard classroom wing. Unitarian Universalism's fifth principle calls on us to promote the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. We hope that many of you will give this principle active expression next Sunday. I did mention it was at 12:30, and there will be a lunch served after the 11 o'clock service by our famous food haulers. And again, welcome. We hope that today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit.
Thank you, Helen. Our opening words are from Services of Religion, which was published in 1937. That was a Unitarian hymnal of that particular era. Author of life, who has made us one nation out of many peoples, unite us in a common love of freedom and a high ambition for our national life. Continue in us the pioneering spirit which led our forebears across the sea and upheld them in an unfamiliar land. Deepen in us a devotion to the common good, so that we may open new doors to the neglected and the oppressed. Cleanse our hearts from the greed which preys on others and deliver us from the politics of corruption. Help us to establish this land in righteousness. Endow us with the spirit of wisdom, those entrusted with authority, that we may stand among the nations of the earth as an example of justice and responsible power. At this time when we celebrate Martin Luther King's birth, may the religion of virtue in which the founders rejoiced find new expression in our words and our deeds. And now if you will rise in body or in spirit for the lighting of our chalice. Please join me in the words of affirmation printed in this evening's program. For that which has been done to lift humankind to new levels of social order and health, let us be thankful. For that which we can do but have left undone, let us strive to give it new life. For that which needs to be done but is as yet beyond our reach, let us continue to search, to seek, and to hope. And now on this chilly evening, I invite you to turn to your neighbor and exchange with them a warm greeting. Please be seated. And if we have some children that would like to come forward for the message for all ages. And I'm going to ask my wife Trina to show some pictures for this. Nothing like recruiting someone at the last minute. Up here. I'll tell you guys. So this is a true story about a woman named Jane Addams, Addams with 2 D's. And she was a very important woman who lived in the city of Chicago about 100 years ago. And she became very, very respected for the help that she gave to poor people and recent immigrants from other countries who came to live in the great city of Chicago. And it's often said that Jane Addams was particularly important because she was America's first real professional social worker. a social worker, which is a profession that many people follow today. Anybody out there a social worker? Ah, okay, we got a couple. Excellent. So Jane, and we got a little picture of her when she was a young girl, she was raised by parents who practiced the Quaker religion. And Quakers believe that religion is really a pretty simple affair. It requires that a person be honest and kind and thoughtful and courageous. And Quakers are always more interested in what a person does rather than what a person actually believes. That makes them kind of like, who else? Not that one. Unitarian Universalist. And actually Jane Addams, when she became an adult, became a Unitarian. But Jane's mother died when she was still only a baby. But she admired her father very much. And the next picture here. And this is her father. And she always tried to live by the same principles that her father lived by, which were those Quaker principles that I just mentioned. Now this wasn't always easy for her to do because Jane often didn't feel very well when she was young. She was often sick and in pain. But still, she would always volunteer to help care for her aunts or her cousins or her nephews who happened to be sick and not feeling well themselves. I think we're going to turn this one off. So Jane was very, very helpful to other people, even though she didn't feel very well. And she had a motto. She said, my motto is to always be honest and sincere and never, never fuss. Now as an adult, the next page, Jane established an institution called the Hull House. And the Hull House was a very, very big house, and it was in Chicago, and people would come to Hull House when they needed help or they were in some kind of trouble. Now when she bought Hull House originally, it was a very run-down building, but Jane somehow found the money to restore it, and she was also able to find people who would help her to buy some very, very nice furniture for Hull House. And the next picture is some of the furniture that were in the living room of Hull House. But Hull House was in a very, very poor neighborhood, and it was surrounded by old buildings in which many poor and needy people lived. So after a while, after Jane Addams had been here for a while in Hull House, the people in the neighborhood came to know who she was. They could recognize her, but many of them didn't really know what went on inside of Hull House. For instance, they didn't know that Jane Addams herself didn't own any of that nice furniture. In fact, she didn't own hardly anything except her own clothes that were in that house. Because she believed that everything that was in Hull House actually belonged to the community, to everyone who used that house for their benefit. Now there was one man who didn't understand this, didn't know what Hull House was all about, and that it was there just to help people like him. So one night, he broke into the building. Next one. Because he thought that anybody who lived in such a fine, splendid house must have all kinds of money hidden away, or perhaps some very expensive jewelry that he could steal. Now, Jane Addams' bedroom was on the second floor of Hull House, and as it happened, this burglar had climbed up the outside wall and pried the window open and come in through her bedroom window. And he was rummaging around in her dresser drawer and in her closet, and Jane woke up. But Jane Addams wasn't the least bit frightened by this burglar in her bedroom. She was only worried that he might, with all the noise he was making, wake up her young nephew who was sleeping in the next room. And so she whispered to him, "Don't make any noise." So this surprised the burglar, and he rushed back to the window in order to climb back down and get away. But then Jane whispered to him more loudly, "Don't go down that way, you might hurt yourself. Walk over to the door and go out in the hall and go down the stairway." And the burglar was so amazed to hear her talking like this that he relaxed a little bit, and he turned around and he headed for the doorway. "What did you come for?" Jane Addams asked the burglar. I need money," said the burglar. my family doesn't have anything to eat and I don't have a job. Oh, you know me, said Miss Adams. Well, I'll tell you what, if that's the trouble that you have, then you just come back here tomorrow morning, you come to my office, and I'll do everything I can to find you a job so that you can make money for your family. Well, the man was kind of suspicious. He couldn't believe that anybody could be that nice and helpful. But he left without making any other trouble. And, well, the next day, there he was, coming in the front door to Hull House, going to Jane Addams' office to ask whether she could help him to find a job, which actually she did. Now, if Jane Addams had had a bunch of money in a row, or if she'd had some jewelry or valuable things that might have attracted that burglar, she might not have been able to accept him coming into her room quite that calmly. She might have been afraid of losing something important, right? But because she had nothing that she could really call her own, nothing that all of her friends couldn't share with her, her only concern when he came in was for his welfare, that he wouldn't get into trouble and therefore leave his family without anybody to earn money so that they could eat. And so, because she didn't own anything in these circumstances, she felt safer in her room than if she had 2 deadbolts on those windows and a deadbolt on her door as well. So that's the story of Jane Addams and her midnight burglar, and I hope you enjoyed it, learned something important about a very, very special woman. And now we're going to sing you out as you go to your classes. Please be seated. And so we are pleased this afternoon to welcome Tasumba Welch to our worship service. Tasumba is a graduate of the Odyssey program, and your offering gifts today will be helping to support the Odyssey program, which has become very well known in our community. And Tasumba is in his final year of study at Madison College and will be entering the University of Wisconsin next fall. So Tasumba, we welcome you here, and he's going to be sharing with us a piece of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
Hello. I'm Tasumba Welch. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I don't know if any of you remember me from last year. Mike, right? It was last year?
Yeah.
I was here last year. And if anybody was at the Martin Luther King community dinner yesterday at the Gordon Commons building, they would have seen me there. Today I will share with you a speech of Martin Luther King that he presented at the Lincoln Memorial. And he and Mahalia Jackson, which is a famous gospel singer, were really close friends back in the days. She was like his advisor, his confidant. And Dr. King went to her the night before he made that speech, and he said to her, I had a dream. And he told her about this long dream that he had. And the next day, she was sitting behind him while he was at the podium in front of all these people at the Lincoln Memorial. And he was gonna talk about these political views that he came up with that was probably gonna stir up a lot of extra trouble for him and his committee. And he sat there and he was kind of thinking, and he was stuck for a minute trying to figure out how he was gonna come out with this speech, knowing that it was gonna create problems and trouble for him. And as he stood there silent, Mahalia Jackson walked up behind him and silently tapped him and said, "Tell him about the dream. Tell him the dream that you had, Dr. King."
So I say to you today, my people, that even though we must face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted inside the American dream, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Let freedom ring when we allow freedom to ring. When we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will speed up that day when all God's children, white men, black men, Jews, Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will join hands and sing that all Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty. Thank God Almighty. We are free at last. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusuma, for invoking that wonderful memory. And now let us be a community of meditation and prayer. Yes, Martin Luther King did have a dream that seized the imagination of a nation, a dream that initiated a moral revolution whose reverberations can still be felt today. Dr. King's was an inclusive dream, promising justice for all, not just for a chosen few. His wide sympathies and his spiritual humility drew us all in, Christian, humanist, Jew, and convinced us that people of widely varying beliefs and backgrounds could live together, could serve together, putting aside their differences in pursuit of a common vision. Nearly 60 years have elapsed since he passed, but the dream lives on. It has to. It is still far from being realized, but Martin's words echoing down the years still challenge us to maintain faith with what he and we once stood for: a world more fair and all her people one. Let us continue on in a moment or two of silent meditation. Blessed be, and amen. Thank you, Helen and Dave. That's fantastic. We're so delighted to have you with us this evening. Well, with the presidential debates in full swing, the Iowa caucuses 2 weeks away, the $1.4 billion Powerball lottery now claimed. With all of this, the media has been working overtime, it seems, to showcase and to analyze the various aspirants to our nation's highest office. And most of the attention has, quite naturally, been directed toward the putative front-runners, with the also-rans fairly begging for even the smallest slice of prime airtime. And as the election season progresses, commentators continue to express surprise and, in many cases, considerable distress that the messages of two of the more prominent candidates have, for many months now, been striking a responsive public chord. Neither Donald Trump nor Ted Cruz show signs of fading in the polls, and their diagnosis of our nation as deathly ill and in mortal danger seems consistent with the outlook of a significant fraction of the American public. Mr. Trump in particular has declared the American dream to be dead. And he holds forth the promise that he alone has a strategy to, as he puts it, make America great again. It would be easy to dismiss such hyperbolic rhetoric and Mr. Trump himself as, of course, irrelevant. but Mr. Trump is no stranger to exaggeration if it gains him the attention that he craves. But while his prescription for what ails us, a 2,000-mile wall on the Mexican border, wholesale expulsion of native-born children, creating a national database for and issuing identity cards to professing Muslims, while all of these prescriptions are nothing short of draconian, his instincts about his fellow citizens do not appear to be altogether off base. The American dream may not be dead, but for many Americans it does appear to be on life support. But let's pause here for just a moment. The American dream. Just what are we talking about here? What are its contours, and why has it become the favorite mantra for successive generations of Americans? Well, the term itself is a fairly recent derivation. It was coined in 1931 by the historian James Truslow Adams in his book, The American Epic. According to Adams, the dream does indeed have an economic aspect, the prospect of achieving, if not riches, at least a fairly high level of physical and financial security. But in its more refined sense, the American dream has to do with something akin to what the psychologist Abraham Maslow would have called self-actualization. The dream is, Adams wrote, the dream of a social order in which every man and woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of their fortuitous circumstances, their birth, or their position. James Truslow Adams is credited with giving a name to this idealistic vision, but its lineage is, of course, a great deal older. For Martin Luther King Jr., and for Abraham Lincoln before him, the dream can be traced right back to the Declaration of Independence itself, in which these memorable Jeffersonian lines are found. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For both King and for Lincoln, this was the crux of the issue. The United States, unique among nations of that time and to a significant degree of our own time, this nation proclaimed that all men, without qualification, were fundamentally and essentially equal, with rights adhering to their very nature as men, never subject to the vagaries of kings or courts or legislative bodies. This is a just and generous system, Lincoln observed, which opens the way to all, which gives hope to all, and consequent energy and progress and improvement of condition to all. And likewise, 2 years before the March on Washington, when the I Have a Dream speech was delivered, 2 years before that, Dr. King, in stirring language, invoked the dream, while at the same time lamenting that the United States had continually fallen short of its promise. Now more than ever, he told the graduates of Lincoln University, now more than ever, our nation is challenged to bring that noble dream into reality. Now at the time, 1961, Dr. King was primarily concerned with the country's still pervasive patterns of racial discrimination and a centuries-long pattern of violent repression. But he was also aware, even in 1961, of the larger picture, and he wove into that graduation address comments on the economic realities that transcended race and that sullied the dream for whites and people of color alike. And so he said, if we are to make the American dream a reality, we must learn to live together as brothers, or we shall all perish as fools. Because we are caught in an inescapable net of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly, affects all indirectly. And so as long as there is poverty in the world, no man can be totally rich, even if he has $1 billion. Now, 55 years ago, America's trade and manufacturing unions were strong. Business was booming. The nation's vaunted middle class was in its heyday. It was the age of Camelot, with a young and handsome patrician working out of the Oval Office. And despite Martin Luther King's unsettling word, and despite America's Cold War jitters, it was, generally speaking, a hopeful time. And even after Michael Harrington's grim sociological study, The Other America, was released in 1962, most Americans still were convinced that poverty was eradicable and that America had a moral responsibility, even then, to give its 50 million disadvantaged citizens access to the American dream. Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, launched after Kennedy's assassination, was a reflection of that confidence and of that hope. But what is the dream's status today? For many, its promise seems to have become purely economic. It has largely to do with purchasing power rather than attaining to one's fullest stature in the broader sense. And then for others today, others like Ammon Bundy and his Oregon insurrectionists, private property rights are paramount, the most important component of the American dream, together with a minimalist government whose primary responsibility is to protect those property rights. Ammon Bundy's convictions harken back to the British philosopher John Locke, who did indeed identify property rather than the pursuit of happiness as one of our three unalienable rights. But however one might conceive of it, for the American dream to mean anything at all, people must have at least a measure of economic wherewithal. And unfortunately, for an increasing number of Americans today, that is simply not the case. Recent studies show that a greater percentage of Americans are poor today than at any time since the early 1960s. And so more than 45 million Americans live below the official poverty line of $12,000 a year for a family of four. 20 million of those are mired in deep poverty with annual income of less than $6,000 a year. Absent a significant intervention, Kay Wright warns, the 14.7 million children who live in poverty today are extremely likely to become poor adults. And so among economically developed countries, the U.S. now ranks 22nd in children's health, 19th in educational well-being, 23rd in material well-being. Many more Americans, somewhat higher on the economic ladder, they've seen their wages stagnate for the last 30 to 40 years, if not decline in real dollars. The Policy Center Demos reports that only 31% of middle-class families have enough assets and income to maintain their position in the middle class over time. More than 2/3, the index reveals, lack the basics to ensure financial security. And now we're talking about the middle class. For more than a few, the American dream has also been linked to home ownership. The opportunity to build equity for retirement or to defray college costs for one's children. But then came the subprime mortgage debacle when millions of less affluent home buyers took out loans whose terms they did not understand and could not possibly meet. The tragic consequences of this cynical Wall Street scam were graphically depicted in the recent movie, The Big Short. So one can understand, given all of the foregoing, why increasing numbers of Americans have become disillusioned. Gallup reports that only half of Americans now agree that there is plenty of opportunity in America, the lowest percentage on record. Or, as the late George Carlin once observed, the reason they call it the American dream is because you have to be asleep to believe in it. Now, one might think that African Americans would be the most pessimistic, the most aggrieved about the current state of affairs. After all, African Americans still are the most affected of any group in our country by poverty and a dearth of educational, health care, and occupational resources, and losses from subprime mortgages. But African Americans are not the most disillusioned and cynical. The angriest and most pessimistic people in America, David Frum writes, aren't the hipster protesters who flitted in and out of Occupy Wall Street. They aren't the hashtag Black Lives Matter agitators. They aren't the remnants of America's labor movement or the savvy young dreamers who confront politicians with their American accents and their un-American legal status. No. The angriest and most pessimistic people in America are the people that we used to call middle Americans. You can measure their pessimism in polls about their expectations for their lives and for the lives of their children. And on both counts, whites without a college degree express the bleakest view. They are not necessarily super conservative, but they do strongly feel that life in this country used to be better for people like them, and they want that old country back. This particular segment of the population, David Frum notes, suffers from some of the highest rates of substance abuse and suicide in the nation. Its members are convinced that their troubles lie with minorities, with recent immigrants who they believe receive the lion's share of the attention, the benefits, and the opportunities conferred by our society. People of European heritage have become, in their perception, an oppressed class. These are folks who wonder, Frum writes, how white male became an accusation rather than a description. As one late middle-aged working class white from Peru, Nebraska recently told a reporter, the American dream is long, long gone. Politicians have ruined it, broken our values, sold out our folks. They only care about themselves. Nobody cares about anyone who works with his hands anymore. And so we've got to get this country straight again before it all just slides right down into hell. A fairly representative feeling. And such feelings of helplessness and marginalization do explain the ascendancy of candidates like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, because they are effectively channeling the anger of a sizable group of Americans, many of them with limited education, who feel, perhaps rightfully, that they are being left behind. Now, in a different century, the plight of such people could be relieved through westward migration. An open frontier, the eminent early 20th century historian Frederick Jackson Turner argued. An open frontier afforded families willing to leave crowded eastern cities the chance to begin life again. But by the 20th century, that option no longer existed. Whither the American dream now? Well, the successor to westward migration, Frederick Jackson Turner argued, is education. And more specifically, a state university education. And so to a considerable extent, what was true then is still true today. Because in 2014, a bachelor's degree brought with it a 95% earnings premium over a high school diploma. For the average American today, higher education is what enables social mobility and allows one to claim a larger piece of the American dream. Policymakers in the early 1960s understood this quite well. That's why in 1965, President Johnson proposed and Congress passed the Higher Education Act. And over the next 12 years, the number of men and women graduating from four-year institutions increased from 1 in 20 to 1 in 4. That higher education was heavily subsidized back then, and Pell Grants, they covered a large fraction of student costs. And because of those measures, President Johnson said, a high school senior anywhere in this great land can now apply to any college, any university in all 50 states and not be turned away because his family is poor. And so in 1965, access to a college education had literally become a right of American citizenship, part and parcel of the American dream. But today, fewer and fewer needs-based grants are available to students, Average state spending on higher education has slipped from 8% of the budget to 4%. Tuition at a 4-year public university has increased by 44% since the year 2000, and collectively young adults now hold over $1 trillion in student debt. The average student debt for a student graduating from a 4-year university in 2013 was $30,000. And because of its prohibitive cost, only a small fraction of children from poorer families are now able to attend 4-year universities, which means that they are likely to remain stuck in poverty for their entire adult lives. 77% of adults in the top quartile of income earners receive a BA degree by the time they're 24 years old. 77%. Only 9% of those in the bottom quartile of earners earn a degree by the age of 24. 77%, 9%. Should we be surprised that today there is less social mobility in America than there is in Canada or in most countries of Europe? And yet this fairy tale of equal opportunity and social mobility persists. Ours is not a country of haves and have-nots, Senator Marco Rubio insists, but rather we are a nation of haves and soon-to-be haves. Now, does Rubio, the son of poor Cuban immigrants, really believe this? Or is he simply unaware that the chances of a person born into the lowest economic quintile, the chances of them rising to the top economic quintile, are 1 in 10? As the New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof recently put it, in the U.S., the best predictor of where you end up is often as not where you start. Now, in his book, Our Kids, The American Dream in Crisis, the Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam recalls a time when people believed that the American dream was meant for everybody. We viewed children in our community as our kids, he said. And the community saw the success of each child as a success for the entire community. Now some people, some commentators, have criticized Putnam for ignoring, in the 1950s, Jim Crow and Michael Harrington's Other America, its invisible underclass. But the larger point he's trying to make is well taken. Rather than working together for what Pope Francis has called a culture of care, we have in recent decades been fostering a culture of mutual recrimination. It is as if the American dream has become a zero-sum game. Its benefits, a kind of lottery prize that the nation's self-aggrandizing ethnic and interest groups are all competing for, rather than something that we are all meant to share. The current policies are undoubtedly part of the problem. Too much money for prisons, too little for education. Too much economic risk assigned to the middle class, too little responsibility assumed by corporate America. Too little equity in the justice system, and too much corruption in the political system. And all of these dynamics have contributed to the unraveling of the American dream. But such policies also reflect values that many of us as Americans still cling to. A frontier ethos of rugged individualism. The Horatio Alger story of rags to riches. And a cruelly Calvinistic perspective that holds the poor solely responsible for their poverty. And so words that Dr. King uttered in 1961 remain relevant today. And so in closing, let me repeat those words and let us carry them with us back into our own lives. Now more than ever before, he said, America is challenged to bring that noble dream into reality. And those who are working to implement the American dream, they are the true saviors of our democracy. Blessed be, and amen. And as I mentioned earlier, before Tsumba shared with us the words of Dr. King, our outreach this week is to benefit the Odyssey Project. Please be generous. to rise in body or in spirit once more for our closing hymn, number 121. For the benediction and the postlude. These are the words of W.E.B. Du Bois. May we find the courage to do the deeds which cry out to be done, and let us not hesitate because of ease or reassuring words or out of self-preoccupation. Mighty causes are calling us: the freeing of women, the succoring of children, the putting down of hate and oppression and poverty, all of these and more. They call with voices that mean work and sacrifice. And so may we be graced with the spirit of that Old Testament heroine Esther, who said, "I will go unto the king, and though he may chastise me, I shall not have gone in vain." Blessed be, and amen.
traveling for me. Bird flying, cast a shadow